This woman was given only hours to come up with $11,000 due to a Hecsdebt bungle. So we are going to go through this together and see if we can figure out what happened between her broker, and this whole property settlement that meant that she had hours to find a pretty large lump sum. I don't think many people would have been able to do that. So Kirsty, who's 26, bought a property in Southport, Gold Coast for $365,000, which is awesome. So she did her homework, went through to different brokers, went to a bank directly, it looks like, and she doesn't say which broker she had actually complete the application. They haven't been named, which is fair enough because the broker can't respond to anything. It's all confidential. But it does say they work at one of the main companies you would think of. There are two that come to mind. There's one that probably everyone knows, but I'm probably too much in the industry. It says she repeatedly highlighted her $60,000 Hecsdebt, which I do believe. A lot of the time when I speak to first-home buyers, that's one of the big things they want to know is how much their Hecsdebt affects their borrowing capacity. So I do believe that she asked that. So she was quoted a $38,000 deposit and encouraged to sign a contract without unconditional approval. That is really important. So that's how it's done in Queensland. We don't have a setup like in New South Wales where you exchange contracts upon unconditional. That's not how we roll. So obviously auctions are different, which is not the case here. But when you're signing a contract in Queensland, you're signing it with conditions. So usually the big ones are finance and building and pest. You can pull out of the contract if those don't pan out. But you can tailor it to however you want, really. It's up to the buyer and the seller as to what they want to put in there. So in this case, it sounds like she at least had finance. And what will happen is if she couldn't get the approval through, she then pulls out and gets her deposit back and all of that. But you've got a window of time. So you've got maybe 7, 14, 21 days are the most common ones we see. So the clock is running. So it sounded like she wanted unconditional before she signed the contract, but she took the broker's advice and signed the contract without it. It may be that she's from New South Wales, or it might be that some of her family are, and she just expected it to work that way, where you get unconditional first. So there's nothing really wrong there, except for maybe the communication. I actually work with a conveyancer who will review all my clients' contracts for free before they sign it. And then if it, for whatever reason it doesn't go through, there's no fees, which I think is important. All right, moving down, it says there was one thing the broker hadn't considered in his sums. We know it's a guy. It doesn't narrow it down. Male mortgage broker on the Gold Coast. There's thousands of them. Her Hecsdebt. So we don't know if they didn't work it into the figures at all, or if they've used the wrong amount. What may have happened is a lot of brokers will have the meeting with the client, they'll gather all the information, and then they'll pass it on to someone to do the actual submission, all of the data entry. It could have been not communicated correctly at that stage. Sometimes the systems as well don't quite pull everything through to the bank. So we have found sometimes where it's not listed on the application, but generally it's in the notes or it's in the servicing calc. So we have to, before we send an application in, make sure that the amount that we're selected is actually going to be approved. So it's hard to tell what happened there, that it's missed all of those. I would really love to see this file. So it says that she trusted them because she holds herself to a standard and she expects them to hold themselves to a standard. Well, yeah, you go to a professional for something, they're the experts. You can't be on top of whatever industry you're in, as well as finance, as well as, you know, conveyancing. I think that's fair enough, but again, we don't know where it fell down, and we don't know if there was anything unprofessional here, whether or not, yeah, it's really hard to tell. It doesn't look good, but I'm trying to keep a really open mind and not make assumptions, because again, we're only getting one side of the story. It goes on to say that once she was locked in, so I think she just means the contract was signed, which is very scary, but it's not the end of the road. The deposit quote ballooned and she was left with hours to come together with thousands of dollars. So the actual, it says bill, that's a really bad term, and it may not be the client, it may be the way that the article's been written. I would prefer to use the actual contribution that she needed to come up with for settlement was $49,000, so 11 more than she expected, and $4,000 more than she had in the bank. So the way it says she had hours to scrounge together that money makes it sound like she was coming towards the end of that finance clause. The bank does take a huge chunk and sometimes more than you have, and you have to get extensions. So it sounds like she was left having to make a big decision with not a lot of time to do it. Let's see what happened next. So she had a brief window to pull out. Yeah, like I just said. And she was scared that if she didn't go ahead, she wouldn't get this opportunity again. I can understand that. That's a very normal feeling for a first home buyer. Particularly, it sounds like she got a really good deal getting that unit on the Gold Coast for $365, I believe it was. That sounds like a good opportunity. And who knows about location-wise how it works with her lifestyle. It may also be something that just fit quite right as well. So apparently at this point she repeatedly asked her broker if there was anything else, because she's cutting it so fine. It doesn't actually even say where that extra money came from, but I'm guessing some guardian angels came to her rescue there. And then she was told there wouldn't be anything else. That's a pretty big call to make at that stage in an application. There are some things that you just, at the unconditional stage, you just can't know what they are within a few $100s really. And that's council, water and rates have to be adjusted on the day of settlement. So there's usually, $300 to $500 of funds that clients aren't expecting. There's registration of mortgages and bank fees, which I would hope have been allowed for, but again, and there's also conveyancing fees as well. So I usually have clients have about a $2,000 buffer while all of those adjustments and everything are coming into play. So moving down, okay. Last week she received a bill of $2,000 in fees that had not been communicated to her. It does not say what those fees were. Could be conveyancing, could be council, could be mortgage broking fees. Brokers can charge fees. A lot don't. A lot just get the commission from the bank. But if they're going to charge fees, they have to quote up front. It could have been quoted up front and the client thought that it was just all part of the deposit or it was all part of the loan. So it doesn't look like it says what they are for. Your solicitor generally knows about 2 to 3 days prior how much settlement is likely to be, and then even they add a buffer because these figures can swing a little bit. It's not thousands of dollars generally. $60,000 Hecsdebt has increased. This is big. The indexation. A lot of people, I actually spoke to a friend who has a Hecsdebt last week. They did not know about the indexation from last year. I thought everyone knew. That's why we don't make assumptions. This may actually be where it has all come undone. If we're all working off a $60,000 Hecsdebt, the banks, the broker, everyone, and then we find out that that Hecsdebt is actually a lot higher, that can reduce the borrowing capacity. And HECS can reduce it quite a bit. Okay, it goes on to say if you're a high achiever at all, everyone will talk to you about going to university. Is that still happening? I was going to do another video on this about how, and it sounds like this woman might be Gen Z, but how millennials were really pushed into uni, and in her case she may love her job and it might have been the right call, but I feel that younger people are maybe pushed into a direction that puts them into a lot of debt, and they don't always end up in the same field. I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but just a lot of people my age that I speak to have got a Hecsdebt for something that they're not using. Hecsdebt reduces a person's net disposable income. I love that. Look at her getting all technical. It could be the client, it could be the journalist. What borrowing capacity is based on by the HECS repayments owed each month, yes, based on a person's wage bracket. Love it. So it goes on to say for Kirsty's $80,000 wage, her Hecsdebt is at 5% and based on $60,000. Is it $60,000 though? Because it said it increased. So I feel like that figure might not be right. So it goes on to say, she goes on to say that she's always been told that Hecsdebt is a good debt, and she's completely changed her opinion on that. It's redacted, not. It's really not. Let's say really. It's really not. I agree with that statement 100%. I'm probably the only person in finance and I feel very isolated. There's no such thing as a good debt. I'm sorry. There might be a necessary debt. You're unlikely to buy a house in cash. So that's where, getting a mortgage that is going to work for you to pay it off as fast as possible comes into play. Hecsdebt, if you can work part-time while studying and fully fund your course, people do that. No one ever talks about it, but people do. Or at least subsidize it so that you're taking out the smallest amount of debt that you need to. That is ideal, especially after this indexation. We're all starting to realize that Hecsdebt is not at all what it's made out to be. According to Uno Home Loans, for someone with a similar wage, saved a deposit and Hecsdebt repayment rate, the university debt can reduce their loan capacity by $28,000 to $36,000. I would believe that. I had one the other day where it reduced it by $50,000. It was only a $26,000 Hecsdebt, but their income was so high that they had to like really aggressively pay it with their bracket. What's the deal with brokers? This is the last little bit on the article talking about brokers. Let's see what they have to say. Banks are rigorous when it comes to looking at what a client can afford. Well, yeah. Banks have heaps of legislation around loaning money to people. Mortgage brokers are bound by best interest duty, also known as BID. So that came in January 2021, I believe. And that basically means that mortgage brokers have to prove with every single application. They have to basically write an essay on why they picked the product, why they picked the loan amount, why it's in the client's best interest, what color underwear they're wearing. Not really, but it feels that way. But it is very open to interpretation. So it's not as easy as this rate is lower, because that rate may be lower, but the loan may not work for the client at all. So there's a lot of different ways to justify it, and it can be a little bit grey. Obviously, it's not in the client's best interest to be having to come up with money last minute or purchasing a property they can't afford, which I'm not saying she can't afford it. I'm just saying that there's a lot of stress that potentially could have been avoided there. But yeah, best interest duty, I mean, it's probably not overly relevant to this circumstances. Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of see what they're trying to do there. She also said home buyers should check with other parties to ensure they have all the correct information. She went to 3 brokers and a bank. I mean, other than a conveyancer, which a lot of people don't think about until after they sign the contract, I don't know what else she could have done. All the conveyancer would have done is say, make sure it's subject to finance, and that's it. They can't tell you if the broker's done the calculations right. They can give you an idea of how much you will need for settlement based on your loan amount, but what's happened here is her loan amount changed. That's why she had to come up with the extra money, is her loan amount, her servicing has dropped down her loan amount. So I don't know if she went to a conveyancer before she signed the contract. If she did, they would have just said the same thing that the broker did, sign it subject to finance, and you're sweet. So that would not have changed a thing. So Kirsty, I really hope you enjoy your new property. I'm so sorry that you've had this experience and that it's been confusing and stressful and frustrating and you're not even sure if it's going to go through. I hope that hasn't scarred you, and that you will eventually in the future, if it's the right thing for you, to either upgrade or purchase another property, if that's part of your plans, that you won't carry this with you. And for now, I just hope you enjoy being a lovely 26-year-old property owner on the Gold Coast, and just enjoy it. Put this behind you, and yet just don't let it overshadow your accomplishment. It was a terrible journey, but the destination is still there, and I really want you to hold on to that, because that is such an achievement for a young woman on her own. It's gone through university, so that took years, and then you've got your Hecsdebt as well, which, as you know, can put its own hurdles in the way. All the best to you, and I wish the broker all the best as well. Hopefully, if there's some sort of processing flaw or communication, that's a gap that they can close, and that this doesn't happen to anyone else. All right, well, that's it for me. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.